the topic. Our speakers consist of a senior teaching fellow from the University of Greenwich, London, the chairman of Trampil Indonesia Foundation, and founder and deputy CEO of Ventures Trust. Following the first webinar held last September 11 on fostering inclusivity in education through digital technology, our webinars aim to champion the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which includes the advocacy to champion quality of education that is equitable and inclusive for all. And Inquirer.net is proud and honored to be a part of this undertaking. 3 important points arose from the first webinar. First, digital technology has emerged as one of the most efficient instruments towards the achievement of inclusive education. Second, teachers as purveyors of inclusive education. And third, holistic and integrated approaches with other sectors of society contribute to the socio-economic development of the country. In this afternoon session, we want to take the discussion further by taking a close look at how schools and learning environments can be restructured, reconfigured, or realigned towards inclusive education. So please listen intently, please take down notes, ask questions, and stay until the end of the session to get the most benefit from today's webinar, which hopefully you can apply to your respective schools. Back to you, Paul.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you. And so with that, I'll just introduce Pak Takim, who is the founder of Trampil Indonesia. I have a huge connection with Takim because we're both advocates of universal design for learning. There's something really important here that I think we need to explore further. So over to you, Takim. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Distinguished participants, it is really my honor to be able to share with you some thoughts on how we could restructure our schools and learning environments for inclusion, especially looking at the Indonesian experience. So this is the title of my presentation, Breaking Barriers, Building Bridges, Navigating Indonesian Initiatives and Hurdles in Transforming Schools for Inclusive Education. Well, like other countries, Indonesia has ratified Sustainable Development Goals, especially the agenda focusing on quality education. This ratification signifies our commitment to ensuring inclusive and equitable education, among others agendas like promoting lifelong learning, etc. Somehow we know that this is a very important agenda that Indonesia has taken this very, very seriously. However, Indonesia faces significant challenges in promoting inclusive education with over than 50 million students, 3 million teachers, and 300 school units. The vastness of the education system poses hurdles in ensuring uniform implementation of inclusive practices. And we also know that looking at this map, not only geographically we are so vast as an archipelago country, but also the social economy disparities and human development index, which varies across the country. Furthermore, among the 300 schools, 12.7% of Indonesian primary schools were private schools, and more than 50% of high schools in Indonesia were private schools. which means that these school units are not directly under the government. It has it owns a board, and of course they need also to make sure that they could serve not only students from high-income families, but also most of them, they have to struggle with how to serve the needy ones. It is vital to recognize crucial aspects in promoting inclusive education, such as legal framework and policies, government initiatives, curriculum adaptations, teacher training and professional development, accessibility in infrastructure, technology in inclusive education, community engagement and culture sensitivity, and socioeconomic disparities. Well, briefly, I would like to share with you the seriousness of our government. Looking at our National Education System Bill, number 20, 2003, at that moment, it's only written that education is conducted democratically, justly, and non-discriminative. And also it's mentioned about special education and special service education. But in the draft law, which will replace the bill of number 20, 2003, hopefully in the very, very near future, we are going to have our new educational bill. Article 64, it already mentioned about inclusive education besides special education. So we are very encouraged to see the government initiatives in the sense that not only the bill, but also some government regulations such as this. It is mentioned that the implementation of inclusive education in formal early childhood education, primary and secondary, it's already mentioned in this regulation. In Article 23, for instance, it's also mentioned about how to conduct training and technical guidance for teachers. And as I mentioned earlier, we have so many numbers of private schools. So the effort to give trainings for private school teachers is also part of the government struggles in this sense. Especially we have so many islands in Indonesia. In Article 24, it mentioned about in carrying out the duties as referred to Article 23. And somehow we know that disability service units in regional apparatus responsible for government affairs in the field of education shall perform the following functions: enhancing the competence of educators and educational personnel in educational institutions, including private schools, in handling students with disabilities. Further than that, the Minister of Education, Culture, Research and Technology, Regulation number 48 of this year, 2023, on appropriate accommodations for students with disabilities. In Article 8, it mentioned that class teachers or subject teachers, as referred to in paragraph 1, acquire competence through the provision of inclusive education courses in undergraduate education programs and or teacher professional education. In Article 8, something interesting, it's mentioned that class teachers or subject teachers, if they could act as driving force for educators in inclusive education, provide teaching assistance in classes with students with disabilities or carry out other activities that support the implementation of inclusive education, they may be provided with career development facilitation and or recognized as part of workload fulfillment, which is very, very important. Further than that, our government through the Education and Culture Ministry also provide guidelines for implementing inclusive education issued in April 2022. So it includes all aspects of students with special needs. So even though this is still not a thorough description, but at least schools can start to use these guidelines to help students with special needs. And it also mentioned about inclusive classroom management. So strategies for creating an inclusive classroom was described, among others, instruction and assistance, utilizing visual aids, repeating rules if necessary, using helpers, other teachers, shadow teachers, or special education teachers. And B, activities with attention to child responses and timing, ensuring that the given time aligns with the child's needs by observing their responses. And media, for example, creating larger pencils covered with Play-Doh to support a child with ADHD. And environment, designing a classroom setting that aligns with the needs of the children. I'm sure all these guidelines are nicely put, but it needs a lot of effort and seriousness to apply all of these. But we are fortunate that in 2019, to be precise, in the month of October, our Minister of Education and Culture announced a new concept, freedom to learn, follows with freedom curriculum in 2022, and it really encouraged differentiation in the classroom. So we are very encouraged with this initiative. It means that there is an open opportunity to help students with special needs as we apply the concept of differentiation or differential learning. So Trampil, the foundation that I belong to, we focusing in equipping teachers. So far we introduced to our teachers and participants of our training sessions Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, which is a teaching approach that works to accommodate the needs and abilities of all learners and eliminates unnecessary hurdles in the learning process and improves the learning experience for all. This means developing a flexible learning environment in which information is presented in multiple ways. Students engage in learning in a variety of ways, and students are provided options when demonstrating their learning. So in the part of the why of learning, which is engagement, the what of learning, how we present the material, the resources, and also the how of learning, action and expression. So if this initiative can be combined with differentiation in the classroom, there is a very promising opportunities that we could serve students with special needs. Of course, there are a lot to learn and accomplish, that we would like to really network with other countries as well and learn from each other. This is my presentation so far. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and I'll give it back to Paul. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Takim. That is such a rich presentation, because I think what Takim gives us a sense of, and some of the questions that everybody said through prior to the webinar, is this piece about we have such scale to work with, but how do we push our ambition for all our children right the way down to every single classroom, to every single interaction. And our next webinar, which will be in March, will be actually on classroom practice. But Takim, thank you for giving us a sense of all the things that you're trying to achieve and some of the tools that you're using. What was very clear in there was that having, as we had at the last webinar, a sense of policy and practice and consistency at national and regional level is really, really critical. So what I'd like to do now is to introduce Emma Longley. And I think Emma is taking us to the sort of the next layer around policy introduction and policy to implementation. And Emma is the Senior Fellow at Greenwich University. She's a specialist in primary education, but also in the training of what we have in the UK, which are specialist teachers and called Special Educational Needs Coordinators. And so Emma is responsible for that course at the University of Greenwich. And I think there's something here about moving us from these big national and school group operations into school level, classroom level, and the interactions with parents. So Emma, over to you.
Good morning. Lovely to join you all. Hello, colleagues. So my name's Emma Longley, and I'm currently working at the University of Greenwich in London. And then my background is as a primary head teacher with what we call a specialist resource provision. So we have additional provision within our mainstream school for children who had autism and speech and language needs. I also run the leadership program for Senkos at Greenwich at the moment. So here's a little bit of background about where we are in the UK at the moment. So England, you can see there on the left, highlighted in lots of different colours. We have lots of different counties and boroughs, and within all of those we have 9 million children in nearly 25,000 schools. As you can see there, we've got some data that explains our average class size of 26.7. We have a limit on the number of children we have in infant classes. So up to the age of 7, children cannot be in a class of more than 30. However, when they get into older age groups, they can have a larger number in the class. We have something called free school meals, which is where children who are from disadvantaged backgrounds, maybe their families are in the armed forces, maybe the children have been in care or are in care, and they are eligible for free school meals. So we've got 23% of our children who are eligible for that. We have different levels of SEN, special educational needs, in the UK. We have something called an EHC, so an education and healthcare plan. That is for the children that have the highest level of need. So you can see there that 4% of children who have special educational needs have the highest level of need, and they may be eligible to access the special school system, and many of them though are taught in mainstream schools. And then we have what we call SEN support, so special educational needs support, where they don't necessarily have the highest level of need, but they need something in their school, some provision, maybe support from an external agency like a speech and language therapist or an educational psychologist or an occupational therapist. So they would have access to specialist support, but not at the same level. And as you can see, we have over 1 million children who access that, so 13%. One thing to note here is that although England is relatively small compared to Indonesia, our counties and our boroughs within our cities all operate slightly different systems for supporting children with special needs, and slightly different funding systems as well, which sometimes brings interesting conversations around the way that we talk about it. So that's really important for us to just think about. So one of the things really that I wanted to do today was to get you to think about what inclusion means for you, and also what it might look like in your schools and colleges, and what it might look in the wider society. One of the things that I do with my trainee teachers when they first come in is thinking about that definition, because for us it can look very different depending on your experience, depending on your family situation, depending upon your beliefs and your values about what inclusion is. And I think before we can start talking about how we do inclusion, we have to think about what it is. So how important diversity is to you, and what value does that bring to the environment that the children are learning in. So for me, inclusion is about belonging. It's about thinking about the values. And one of the things that we promote with leaders with special needs is the person-centered approach. So we put the child at the center of everything that we do. One of the elements of that is listening to the child and listening to the parent and getting their point of view, or they're getting their understanding of what their experience has really been like, and thinking about equity. So it's not necessarily about everybody getting the same. It could be that our children have specific needs where there are specific things that we need to put in place for them, which might be different to what we put in place for other children. And that's where our education and healthcare plans come in. I'm very much a believer in what we call a bottom-up approach. So thinking about the needs of the child and thinking about their experiences and then building on that, rather than thinking about examinations and the end result, which is more of a top-down approach, where we think about what they need to be able to do to achieve that particular level. So it's about having high expectations, and also about removing labels from children. So one of the things to think about is, how do we describe our children, and what's the first word that you think of when you think of a child that's working in your school or learning with their family at home. Parents and carers and families are an essential part of this, and the English legislation does promote that very strongly, particularly in terms of the children with the highest need, and enabling those children to have access to teaching, to good quality teaching, to thinking about their learning opportunities, and also thinking about the wider community that they live in. We look very closely at how we assess those children and the progress that they're making, because the progress they make might not necessarily be measurable in terms of the academic advances that they make. It could be around the holistic development. So it could be something like confidence, it could be something about participation, it could be something about engagement. So it's very important that we consider what success will look like for those children that you are working with. We also consider aspects of things like behaviour, and we talk about behaviour for learning, and about how they are supported in achieving that. So mental health, and supporting children's understanding of, how to be a good citizen, but also thinking about things like their emotions and how they can regulate those, so how they feel in certain situations. Attendance is also very highly promoted by the UK government, and ensuring that children have access to education by being in school. And this demands quite a lot of knowledge and expertise and experience of our teachers. So thinking about your setting and thinking about what that might look like, here are some examples from a school just south of London, out in the countryside, and there's some wonderful experiences here that children in a mainstream secondary school are experiencing. So thinking about how your practices are organised and thinking about what you might see in that setting and what you might hear people saying, and what you might think or feel when you're in that setting. So we are thinking about the things that people do, but also the experience that we are hearing around us. And for this particular school, it's all about access to learning, it's about aspiration, and it's about achievement. So thinking about your own setting, what is it that could make it more inclusive for your children? But we do acknowledge that there are certain challenges and certain barriers, and some of those can be around the mindset, the way people think about education and think about inclusion. It could be historical norms, it's always been a certain way, and then we're trying to challenge that and change it. It could be about resources or money. It could be, there might be frustrations with the systems, and in the UK there are certain frustrations with the time it takes to diagnose children or the resources that are available, and intervention and support is really important so we can address those gaps, particularly ones that came out of COVID, which has led to some social and emotional developmental needs, and also areas around speech and language. So for us, it's thinking about our knowledge of the children and their families, and thinking about what evidence and what research there is to support really good progress. So we're considering what it feels like to be a learner in the middle of all of this. So when we are considering that, if you think about your settings, and if you had to make a list of all the children that were in your setting, who would be at the top there? Why is that? Are we drawing attention to the things that are not right, or are we drawing attention to the things that are successful? So it's important that we think about how we organise our environments for children to learn as well, and thinking about the way in which we categorise that. So are we looking at ability, or are we looking at potential? So there is a growing work towards thinking about this idea of neurodiversity, and we all experience the world in different ways. Neurodiversity itself is a biological fact. All our brains are unique. And we talk about neurodivergence in the UK as a term for when someone's brain processes, learns, or behaves differently to what is considered typical. So what we formerly considered as a problem or abnormal, scientists have come to understand that actually neurodiversity can have many benefits. And that's quite a shift in people's thinking. So we are not necessarily treating it as perhaps a medical illness or a deficit. We are thinking about them having different ways of learning. And that's really important because we're moving towards an idea of adapting our teaching so that we are able to make sure that children have opportunities to learn. So these brain differences are not deficits, and we're changing the way of what normal, that word normal, might mean, and thinking about the way in which we support teachers in promoting that. The word neurotypical would be the word that we would describe individuals whose brain develops and functions in ways that are considered usual or normal by society. And again, there is a shift there to be considered. So we have this idea of social models versus medical models. So a social model is the idea here that we have to adapt our environment to meet the needs of the person experiencing it. A medical model is more about thinking about what is wrong with the person or the diagnosis. So if you go to the National Health Service website in the UK, it talks about what the condition might look like. So the things that the child might experience that are different or more difficult for them. So the way that we are currently promoting inclusion in the UK is to think about this social model. So we think about the way that the world is viewed by the person experiencing it. And people can be disabled by barriers in our society. and not by their difference. So thinking about our buildings and are they accessible to children who perhaps are in a wheelchair? Have we got systems in place to support children with hearing impairments or sight impairments? What are we doing in our environments that enable them to have an easier access to the learning that's happening? Not everyone uses the social model, and again, it's thinking about why it's important that sometimes a medical diagnosis is useful, but then we need to adapt our practice to ensure that those children learn. So thinking about the knowledge that teachers need, this comes from the UK teacher standards, and this is the part that talks about what we expect teachers to be able to do in schools. So you'll note there at the top, adapt teaching to respond to the strengths and the needs of all pupils. So not just children with special educational needs, but all children. So thinking about our differentiation, thinking about the challenges, thinking about their whole development as a person, and also thinking about other elements of things like higher ability, thinking about children with English as an additional language, and thinking about how we can engage them effectively. The UK organises special educational needs provision in using the Special Educational Needs and Disability Code of Practice. This is a government statutory document which all schools follow, which is a really important document because it builds upon what we have in our country called the Children and Families Act, which was written in 2014. And that act, or that piece of legislation, enabled us to think about the way in which we work with children and work with families, and put in particular legislation to support that. This builds upon our Equality Act. So the Equality Act in 2010 legally protects people from discrimination. So there are wider societal expectations about what we do in schools. And then we break this down, and on the right-hand side there, you will see the 4 broad areas of need. So there are 1.5 million children in the UK who have special educational needs, and we categorise them into those 4 areas. The most common type of need is autistic spectrum disorder for children with the highest level of need, an EHCP plan. And for children who have SEN support, it's speech, language and communication needs. So we use what we call the graduated approach to support teaching and learning in classrooms, and that follows this cycle, thinking about the strengths, thinking about the needs, thinking about the challenges and how we approach that. And then there is governmental guidance. So for example, here, these are the elements that we would be expecting teachers to do to show good practice in their classrooms. So thinking about environment, understanding children, access to learning, intervention support, and also working with teaching assistants or support staff. And then coming to the way that we lead SEN, or special educational needs, these are the 3 categories that teachers who lead special needs need to adhere to. And they have to follow a course and be qualified to become special educational needs. And the picture of the boat there really is to kind of show an example of leadership in a school that I experienced recently, where they were talking about stepping out of the boat. And not necessarily just taking the easy path, because professional knowledge and understanding is always growing, and we need to lead and coordinate that provision, including people's mindsets. And people need to develop that understanding, those professional, but also the personal qualities, both of teachers and of children. And to conclude, just thinking about what it is that we are trying to achieve. You know, we need to champion all of our children. We need to put them at the centre of everything that we do. And this lady here, Rita Pearson's done a fantastic TED talk, which you may want to listen to. I've used it to inspire schools and teacher trainees as well. But thank you very much for listening. And it's been a pleasure to share this with you this morning.
Oh, thank you, Emma. We've had loads of comments coming in the chat around this. There's some real common themes that are emerging around human potential Takim was talking about how we do that, and also the importance of the legal framework and government intervention, or rather government setting the tone, the standards. What I think is starting to come through for everybody is this thing about equity, not just equality. Yeah. How do you ensure that everybody realizes, their own potential, their absolute potential? And also, I think there's something here about how we reframe how we think about everybody. Okay. Yes. And also, there is just a comments just come in around, will there be another webinar? Yes, there will, and that will be looking at classroom practice. And Emma is a bit of an expert on that. So I hope that everybody got value out of that. I certainly did. These slides will be available, everybody, so you'll be able to look at some of the detail that Emma's put in there. So moving on, and thank you, Emma, to our final speaker, and then everybody will come back in terms of the panel at the end, is Mr. Tristan Williams. And Tristan was a special school head teacher and also a national leader of education here in the UK, and has helped to develop a number of schools for a whole community in a deprived part of the United Kingdom. And I'm sure he'll tell us how they've gone about setting up their inclusive practice. Thank you, Tristan.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for giving me the opportunity of joining you today from a fairly cold UK. Just want to make sure, Paul, that people can see my screen before I go any further. Is that okay? Great. Okay. The first bit I'm going to be talking about, as Paul mentioned, our trust supports and educates 4,000, just over 4,000 children. We have 850 staff members that work in the trust. But we have a special school within our trust called the Venturers Academy. And the Venturers Academy is a school that caters for children with a primary diagnosis of autism. And the mission of Venturers Academy is where everything's possible. We want all our children, we want all our staff members, we want the whole community to be brave. We want our whole school communities to be courageous and to be able to transform the lives of some of society's most vulnerable children. So for the parents, that their voice is heard and they're active in improving school life. For our staff members, that they experience full job satisfaction as autism specialists and feel supported to grow and to be better in what they do every day. For our children to feel happy, for our children to feel safe. We want them to come to school to learn, and they are central to everything that we do. And then our local community, working together to improve life chances for all, one student at a time. That's our mission within the special school. So some background. So Venturers is a school specifically for children with autism. The school has grown dramatically in size in the past 4 years, from 95 students currently to 243 students, all with a diagnosis of autism. There is still a significant difference, though, between the numbers of boys in the school, which is 79%, compared to girls, which is 21%. And we are aware that the diagnostic tools for diagnosing autism have changed in the last couple of years. So we are starting to see a shift from more boys coming in to more girls coming into the school, therefore having a shift in the curriculum and the offer that we are also giving. And currently 70% of our pupils live in the poorest 1% in not just the county here, but in the whole of our country. So let me just share some of the national statistics with you here in the UK at the moment. 80% of children with a diagnosis of autism also have mental health difficulties. So the key concept around that to me is, how do we make children feel safe in school? How do we ensure that children are happy in school? So constantly we are adapting the curriculum, being courageous, and profoundly personalising the curriculum to meet the needs of every child, socially, academically, and emotionally. We're aware that in 2017, pre-lockdown and the COVID pandemic, that 1 in 10 children had a mental health need. Now in 2023, 4 in 10 children have a mental health need in this country. So are we adapting what we're doing in school to meet their needs? We're conscious that self-harm has also increased by 161% pre to post-lockdown. Again, a key area coming back to making sure that our children feel safe and our children feel happy in school. Eating disorders have increased by 600% pre to post-lockdown, with a significant increase in boys as part of that. We're aware that bullying and loneliness are the top 2 concerns of children currently in our schools, and that was from a survey of 43,000 children. And children persistently being absent from school is also 2.5 times higher now than pre-pandemic. And a survey by Epicure currently shows that 80,000 children who were born pre-33 weeks are currently in our schools, in our primary schools, with a neurodiverse profile. Therefore, colleagues, the profile of children has changed and is changing and will keep on changing. Therefore, as educators, we are the guardians of their childhood. And the question I ask you today is, are we delivering to meet the needs of this cohort that is changing and will change? One concept that we have been working very closely on is supporting children from the day they are born until the day they come to school at the age of 5. This is a national project currently that we're working with a group of schools, which started in London, but now working with 30 trusts right across the country, called the Cradle to Career Partnership. And as I said, we're focusing on supporting those children between the ages from the day they are born until they come into school. And what we've been finding is that children with the most complex special educational needs and children that come from areas of really high deprivation weren't supported during the COVID pandemic. We're clearly concerned that these children are coming to school still not being able to use the toilet, for example, but also having severe speech, language, and communication issues. So there's a real effort across our teaching profession at the moment for us to understand to a much deeper level than ever before about understanding the community, therefore building a model to support children and families, not just in our school or not just in our multi-academy trust, but right across the city of Bristol, based on a deep understanding of local need and a relational approach. A clear focus on building strong family relationships and groups so families can turn to each other and look for help at the point of need. So we can identify opportunities for shared learning between schools, between trusts, where opportunities can emerge, and we can create greater coherence for children as they move from nursery into the primary phase and moving into the secondary phase. We need to be able to develop great teachers that really understand the needs of our communities at a level that we've never needed this before. So these great teachers share learning about models of excellent teaching and teacher development, and identify opportunities and share those learning practices that facilitate smoother transition between phases for our children. And finally, and all through a curriculum, the focus is on children from the day they're born until the day they leave us at the age of 19, and to identify opportunities again for shared learning between schools, between trusts, sharing best practice nationally, and creating again greater coherence for those children as they move through the phases within our settings. So the development of therapeutic needs in the school. We employ our own therapists because we feel that those therapists need to be in our school every single day, that they understand our children, they understand our communities, and they're also here to support our staff members, our teachers, when actually the teachers don't have the answer. And for me, as an educationalist, I don't have the answer, but I must be curious in my thinking. If I can't find the answer, who can I work with to hopefully find the answer so I can support the needs of the most complex children? So shoulder to shoulder in our classes, in the corridors, outside at playtime, during lunch times, colleagues are working holistically on a universal offer, where the therapists work with teachers around professional development and training, about positive relationships, about trauma-informed approaches, about making sure that our staff are dynamic and that key workers are meeting the needs of our children, and also that student voice is living and dynamically being used. So we're listening and using that information coherently to make sure that we can be agile to meet the needs of our children. And then wave 2 is about group intervention, some additional pastoral support, coaching, mentoring, speech and language therapy by clinical experts, occupational therapy by our experts, and a range of therapeutic interventions as well, from cognitive behavioral therapy to art therapy to movement therapy. And then moving on to wave 3, specialist interventions. Again, this is one-to-one support for our children at the point of need, with clinical experts working within our schools. So what is different about our curriculum now moving forward? Well, we have to make sure that we are confident that we're meeting the needs of all our learners. We need to make sure that our curriculum at every level, that the pupils leave the school with qualifications, so it opens the doors for them to be able to move smoothly onto the next step of their lives. That each phase of the curriculum prepares students for the next step and preparing them for adulthood and to be as independent as possible from adult support. We need to make sure that the curriculum is highly personalised, so we have a deep understanding of those children, and that we are courageous enough to change the curriculum to meet the needs of those complex learners. The offer needs to be broad, it needs to be balanced, also enabling all learners to experience all subjects, creating equity of opportunity. And the curriculum engages pupils with the world and their community, and reflecting their experiencing and enhancing this using cultural capital. So prepare, experience, personalize, communication, independence, individuality, kindness and responsibility underpins aspects of our curriculum. It's crucial that children experience the world and can be aware of what is happening globally. So over the years, we've led, and I've led expeditions, not quite to the North Pole, but not far from the North Pole. Some of the pictures here, I've taken children to Africa on expeditions. I've taken children above base camp in Everest. The other picture here is the cycling around the Alps. And also we managed to sail a ship around the UK coastline that took us almost 2 months. but building real life experiences that develops an understanding of the world is also crucial and central to our curriculum. And then just finally, just to finish up, the teaching and learning model is understood by every staff member within the academy. And it's all about learning, linking the learning, chunking, breaking it down, knowing what questions you need to ask, scaffolding and supporting those learners, making sure that developing the independent skills, that we show what needs to be learned, and that we know deeply what learning looks like in the context of those children, lesson after lesson, week after week, month after month. So the curriculum should be designed around research and an evidence base. We should be listening to staff members and students and be agile to be able to change that. That our staff and pupils' interests are also taken into account, but also that we're following statutory guidance. And this word keeps on coming up today, ensuring equity for all our students, having high expectations, having fluidity, but also trusting our teachers to meet the needs of these children, which comes back to our mission and the mindset of where everything is possible. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Tristan. That was, again, an amazingly rich presentation. And I know we've had a whole set of questions coming in. I think for colleagues that are listening around the world, there is something here about how we've moved in this webinar from looking at Indonesia as it goes on this amazing journey towards inclusion, to looking at a school which has had the time to reflect on how it wants to meet the needs of all the children within it. And it's an incredibly powerful vision and an incredibly powerful journey, I think. There's been some questions in the chat, and some that were asked before. We've got 5 minutes. So Lily, if we could possibly have the cameras for the 3 presenters up at the same time, that'd be really, really helpful. And we're just going to try and just work through some of those questions. Okay. Just a note for everybody is that there will be a 3rd webinar, which the invite will go out, and that will be really moving on from what Tristan's just been talking about. We'll be moving into what is actually happening in the classroom practice, and perhaps also practice for parents, that engagement that we've been talking about holistically within the community. So just in terms of just the last 5 minutes, some of the questions that we've come up to, is really a big question about the environment in schools. Yeah. And how do we alter and develop the environment in schools? Have any of the colleagues had thoughts around that?
I suppose you have to think about, thinking about the mindset of people before you even start to think about the environment, and about the importance of how people view inclusion and about what it means to them, because you can put all kinds of resources into an environment and you can make it look a certain way, but actually if people haven't got the understanding and the mindset that underpins that, it's not going to achieve what you set out to achieve.
Okay.
And I would fully agree with Emma. You know, resources are important, but it's the culture, it's the interaction. And teaching as a relationship-based profession, that is the key thing that ignites the passion in these children. When these children come into school, the eye contact, the hand that reaches out, the warmth that you show towards these children, that to me is the key element for transforming the lives of these children and getting their education back on track. So environment is important, clearly, but to me, it's the culture that exudes in that school, and the relationships between the adults and the children is the key thing that engages these children.
Okay.
Just adding the comments. Yeah, in Indonesia, we have what we call it as learning environment survey, and it's conducted nationwide. All schools needs to be involved in this survey and making sure that there's no bullying, the learning environments is supporting all children, etc., etc. Even though we still need to work on promoting more in inclusive education, but the tools are there. Thank you.
Okay, cool. So we're hearing here something again about that relationship between national policy, national drive, yeah, and how that relates to every individual child. So there's something here. Tristan was talking about, I might not have the answer, but I can be curious, but I've got a framework within which to operate. And I think that's a really big takeaway for school leaders that we've got here that are moving towards inclusion. Okay, another quick question that we've got a 2 minutes left. Just checking down here. There's a question here, Tristan, and I think maybe for you and Emma, with your experience, and Takim especially as well, thinking about scale, how to expand opportunities for education of the children coming from the very poorest sectors of society. I think all three of you have done this in your lives. So I'd be really interested to think about this equity and poverty question.
Yeah.
Who would like to go first?
Well, perhaps I could start first since Indonesia has helped us in this area. What we really encourage is to involve the community. That's most important thing. And the second thing is, in Indonesia, we have a motto, we call it as a lifestyle, helping each other. Gotong royong means how could we support each other? So hope by having this kind of culture, we hope that we can take care. More fortunate schools, for instance, could help the more unfortunate schools. This kind of system that we are really encourage the community to take part of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think for me, it's about engaging with the families and really understanding the needs of the family and the communities that they live in. You know, I talk to my trainee teachers about not just driving to school, but actually being aware of the environment that and the expectations and the kind of societal norms that exist within those particular areas, and that's just become normalized to them. So they don't have that sense of kind of aspiration. You know, I know head teachers that take their children off on these fantastic trips to different places to experience things, and they say they really get to know their children when they see them interacting with their families. And I think for me, that is one of the things that I try and instill in our new teachers, because it's not just about teaching them stuff, it's about understanding them.
Tristan?
Yeah, I fully agree with colleagues, and by understanding, you become an active listener. By becoming an active listener, you get a deep understanding of what the community is telling you. And one thing that we're encouraging on a weekly basis in school at the moment, in tutorials and through the key worker system, is what we call "you said, I did." So on a weekly basis, all the children have an opportunity to say how they feel, and the staff members have got a week to follow that up to say, I did. Because there's tensions in the communities at the moment, there's poverty at levels that I've never seen before, and these children are living in an area that I've never truly experienced. So active listening, empathetic listening, but also acting on those concerns that they've got. And as I said earlier, you know, it's a relationship-based profession, and reaching out to our most deprived is even more important now than ever before.
So I think there's a huge takeaway there about, for school leaders and school organisers, system organisers, is about the question about how much we are listening and how much that listening provides equity. And with listening and questions comes connectedness. Amazingly powerful. I just really think it's probably the best time to stop there. That message is so strong. I want to thank the three speakers, Takim, Tristan, and Emma. You have been absolutely amazing. I want to thank Nisai Group and Drew Patel, the CEO, for his support for everything we do, and especially IMI and InquiryNet, because they make this stuff happen with us as our media partner. Everybody who's attended, there's a certificate available for you. You just have to download the link, which is in the bottom. And I really hope that you can attend our next webinar in March. The date will go out, where we'll be in that classroom rummaging around as teachers ask questions and find out more about their kids. Thank you, everybody. It's been a great hour, an absolute pleasure. I'll see you all soon.